Welcome, Internet. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that I've had in my mind for quite a while, which is the usefulness and limitations of university training in the field of psychotherapy. Title that just rolls off the tongue, right? So I want to caveat this with three things very quickly. So my experience is, of course, that of French university training and academic rigor, but French, right? So whatever happens in other parts of the world, I'm not aware of. So your experiences might be quite different, and that's okay. Second, my training was done before any arrival of AI, which, to the extent of my understanding, has changed since quite a bit in terms of education and tertiary education. Thirdly, this video is not here to run down universities or university training for psychotherapy. Quite the opposite. I am very pro-university and higher education. I feel that training for psychotherapy can only be done in an academic setting, not necessarily in a university per se, but in a school that is rigorous, that you can't do that in 2 weeks or a month or even a weekend. No, I'm saying this because a whole other topic that I won't be talking about, but there's a lot of issues with certain forms of training that are express and don't give way to proper understanding. So, very simply, I want this video to be a clear explanation of what are the useful parts of university and what are their limitations. But, and this is very important, I am in no way saying that one should bypass them. Quite the opposite. I think that university is essential in the practice of psychotherapy. It is my perspective, right? But I do feel that formal training is important, very important, in the work that we do. And when I say the work we do, I include all mental health professionals, right? So be it the psychiatrist, the psychologist, the licensed social worker, the psychotherapist, and perhaps a counselor. I know a bit less about them because we don't have them in France, so if you want to educate me, feel free to do so. Anyway, the point of this video is going to be basically to shed a bit of light on why is it useful to go to university. Well, the first reason is that university is going to train you to understand mental health in a theoretical way, i.e. they're going to give you an explanation for mental health, a framework of reference, and also they're going to train you into what is available in terms of treatment, both psychotherapeutic and medical. So often medical, except if you're a psychiatrist, you're not going to prescribe often, meaning that I know that in universities in America, in like I think 5-6 states, they can. So what I'm saying is to be taken in pinch of salt, but in France we don't prescribe medication. So you get, however, a bit of training on it to be able to identify when it might be useful for a patient to be referred to a psychiatrist. And this is a very important part of university training because you have to be able to identify what you can do and what you can't do. This, like pros and cons, is very, I think, linked to a good training that it teaches you the things that you can do and the things that are going to be too much or ineffective, which is also very good. So already from the get-go, university gives a framework that is important for the patient and for the therapist, that in a way you're guided, you know what you're talking about with the patient. This doesn't mean it can't change, right, or that you have the absolute answer, but at least you have some form of knowledge. And I think that's very important. It's also essential to have knowledge because the patient is coming for a form of knowledge. That doesn't mean that it should be placated on them or just superimposed, but just the fact of you knowing what, at least theoretically, what the patient has is important for the patient, even though it should never be reduced, the patient should never be reduced to the symptoms or to the disorder, of course. So secondly, and very interestingly enough, university can help you become curious. For example, there's a lot of things that you find in university that you might not have found in other forms of training. Because university works also through majors and minor subjects, the minor subjects can be incredibly diverse. Like, for example, in my training, I studied philosophy, Italian cinema. I'm not an expert, so take of it what you must, but still a bit of training in that. And also Nietzschean philosophy. And there was so many topics that could be taken, right? Like ancient Greek, Latin, and so on and so forth. So it's those extra topics that I find incredible because basically they give a certain form of opening to the outside world, this form of curiosity that you might not have if you just had the pure academic, rigorous topic. Sometimes you get extra topics, and those extra topics are great because they inform you about the world beyond and open up and stimulate a form of curiosity in the individual. At least that's what I found. A curiosity that's going to be so important when practicing psychotherapy, because you're going to have to be curious of the patient's life, not in a voyeuristic way, but just like what's is happening, why is it happening. It also widens the scope of your knowledge, that you're not just studying psychology, you studied a whole plethora of interesting subjects. And those interesting subjects can come in handy with a patient because most patients are not going to be trained in psychology, right? Very few of them are. Most of them have a wide range of professions and of activities and of hobbies. And the fact of having an opening in university is also a positive because then you have an opening in your thinking and in your processes, and some of those side topics might even come very relevant with certain types of patients. Like, for example, if you have patients to work in the cinema department, it might have been important and even good to have that training so you have a bit of basic knowledge that's common with the patient, which helps a form of breviary with them. So it's incredibly important to understand that broadening of scope and of knowledge helps infinitely with patients because you understand more things and you're not just a psychologist, right? You're plenty of things, and that the plenty of things tend to feed very well into therapy, both for the clinician and for the patient. Even though you might never talk about it with the patient, the fact of having that knowledge is a plus. Now, moving on to the question of research. University provides you with the interest and benefit of being able to do research. So you might never use it in psychotherapy, right? You might never write an article, you might never read a thesis of someone else, you might never write your own thesis. But the idea here, and very concretely, is this: that you can do research. You can see where the idea comes from, how it's basically developed, who has produced the idea, what is the idea based on, and all of this is important because at the age we're now in, the age of the internet and of artificial intelligence, it becomes more and more important to be able to be selective about the knowledge. Because there's a wide array of information, you have to be able to basically process and order the level and the pertinence of information. And you have to be able to see what is basically a solid argument made in certain cases, or solid understanding, and what is more of a personal opinion, or basically someone that's basically a charlatan. So this is where the academic codes come into play. So we all know those codes, like the references, like the form of like a format of an article, of a book, and so on and so forth. So you might think that it's annoying, right? But those codes are important because they allow us to understand how things are structured. And that structure gives a form of coherence and demonstration on a factor, meaning that it's not just someone speaking out of just pure opinion. It's someone that has developed an opinion, but a professional and informed opinion. Not someone that's basically inventing something because it sounds good, right? So academia helps to understand where the information comes from and be able to select the information. And for the patient, this is essential because You're not going to know everything at the end of university. The training is going to be ongoing, but I'm going to talk about that later on. Therefore, you're going to have to make a selection in the information that when you will see some forms of disorders or some form of behaviors or phenomenology or subjectivity that you never encountered, and that will happen, you're gonna have to do research. There's no way around it. And the idea that you're gonna have to order that research is paramount. Like, for example, what is it? How does it work? And all of that is gonna help you with the patient, because basically a lot of people have written on their experiences, but they're not all equal and they're not all of the same caliber. And some form of basically essays and of thinking help us in the field to understand where something is going to go. For example, let's say, I don't know, you've just met someone that has a malignant narcissistic profile, right? So you might never have encountered this, and people in training, you might never have learned about them. However, you might do research and realize that, for example, Otto Kernberg, this is just one example among thousands, right, wrote on this, and that might help you understand what is going on with this patient and what you can do and what you should not do, and where you should basically orient the therapy towards, right? What is the goal? What are the possible goals? And that is helped by the fact of the triage of information. And this is an important part of university training. Where does the idea come from, and is it pertinent, and is it solid? Because the problem is, if you follow any lead, some leads can be disastrous, especially at an age on the internet where basically some people claim everything and anything, and this can be disastrous. Like, for example, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but let's say the question of vaccines, right? Which has nothing to do with psychology, but is yet an important question. A lot of people are convinced that they do more hurt than good, but research has shown that, for example, it doesn't cause autism. And this is important because people have stayed onto old debunked research, and the fact that you know how to research helps you filter the information and get the best possible information for the circumstances. Right? And the last helpfulness of the university training that I want to talk about is basically teaching the therapist a certain form of positioning. That, for example, you're gonna be given a base framework to which work on, and that basic framework is something that's going to allow the clinician to have theories, to have things in their minds, which means that when they will meet a patient, let's say, with anxiety and depression, which is often the bread and butter of psychology, the disorders that we tend to see the most, right? Statistically speaking, of course. You're going to have preconceptions, you're going to have theories in your mind that are going to help you sync these processes. And that's thanks to university, that they train you to have an a priori, which you have to deconstruct, right? Because it doesn't always work, but at least you have something to work with and to work on with the patient, right? So also very important and very essential is that baseline. So now let's move on to the limitations. So as I was saying, it's a baseline, but that baseline is what it is, because university can never train you for every single situation. And this is the importance of why they train you to do research. It's because you're going to be confronted, and this is inevitable, to phenomenologies, disorders, subjectivities, interpersonal relationships that you've never ever trained for. That's inevitable, right? Even if you're a specialist, you will always encounter things that you've never seen. So therefore, the education is always going to be ongoing. This is one of the main limitations of university. They will never train you to know everything, and that's a fantasy. What they will train you in is basically how to handle the unknown, and this is great, right? But that means that half of the job is yours. You have to work and continue and further your education always. Like there's never a point where you basically reach the tops, because what happens is that as time goes on, new understandings come basically to our understanding. I'm sorry, repetition, but basically we further when through science, through research, and so on and so forth. So, for example, let's say the question of autism and ADHD. When I was trained, it was starting to emerge, but it was still, at least in France, not that not a topic that was too much talked about. It was not that relevant. Autism was still considered as classical autism, and with very rare variations called Asperger's. And even then, like since then, we've changed vocabulary. But I'm just trying to point out the fact that the understanding of ADHD and autism has changed, and this is a good thing. It's positive. But, and this is a big but, university didn't train me for that, because they did not know, and they could not have known how it was going to change and how it was going to evolve. However, it gave me the tools to understand it and to keep up, and to have the potential to keep up with all of this new understanding. This is incredibly positive, right? And this is also one of the major points of university, is that they allow you to enter the race, but they're not the ones that are going to keep you running. That's you that's going to keep yourself running as a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, and so on and so forth. And basically, that's one of the main limitations, is that it's the entry ticket, but not the end of the story. A second limitation is the fact that university is going to train you in a certain way, meaning that regardless of the variety which exists and which they might train to and point out to, they're going to often specialize in one certain area, which basically means that you will go in with a presupposed hypothesis or model, which isn't bad, but it is a limitation, because you're not going to be able to master all models yet again, because that's not really the job of the university. The job of the university is to give you this framework to start with. In a way, it's in my mind, that's how I see it. It's like the starting set of, let's say, a game. You start with the basics, and then you have to build yourself up, right? So there is these limitations. There is also the point that universities can be quite dogmatic, right? The knowledge is in one goes one way. It's the professor that teaches you, right? The questions that question the knowledge or want to expand on it are often, at least in France, badly seen. You're not supposed to question the professor. The professor gives you the knowledge, that's it. And you learn the knowledge and you basically spit out the knowledge. It's not seen as a positive to question it, which is a shame, right? Because a conversation is always interesting. But that's the way it goes, right? So it can be a limitation. Also, another point is that university, and this is also another limitation, does not guarantee a good professional. So this might come to quite a surprise, for example, the layperson, but universities do not, let's say, force you to abide by certain moral principles or ethics. They just train you to understand the knowledge and be able to use the knowledge. Which, I mean, a lot of bad people can gain that knowledge. I mean, it's not something that is only exclusively for, let's say, people that are positive or have a stable personality. A lot of people just can pass the exams and have internships and just go forward in this field with not necessarily good intent. So this is another limitation of university. University in of itself is not doesn't mean that the therapist is good or that they are competent. It just means that they have a baseline of understanding, and that's also something that, and it's not judge of moral character. One can be a very good therapist without, let's say, 8 years of training, and one can be a disastrous therapist with 8 years of training. So there you go. It's absolutely not, there's nothing moral about it, right? It's purely knowledge. Therefore, it's another limitation of university. So university is not the be-all and end-all of this of being a therapist, but I think it's an important step, an important part, because you're going to be trained in so many things, and this is a wonderful topic. Also, I should add that at least in France, it's only half of the work, because in France you have university training, but you also have internships. Like you have about, on the whole, right, on the 5 years, you get 500 hours of basically of internships in which reference train the soon to be psychologist in psychology and how to handle certain events. And because they participate in institutional life, you really get to see a wide range of patients and of problematics, which is very important and very interesting. So therefore, even university often does that and trains a clinician, and often the teachers tend to say, what you will get to become a psychotherapist will mainly be in the internships. And I agree to an extent, but not fully, because I do think that university training is essential. And this is pretty much it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, any comments, feel free to put them in the comment section. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.